And I think we are live.
Says
Welcome.
broadcast live.
We are off. Yes. Welcome to Books and Beer with me, Luke Richardson, and Phil Williams is joining me today, which is absolutely amazing. And we're going to talk about books. I'm going to drink a beer. Phil's at midday, is it, Phil? Or is it 11 now
Yeah,
for you?
yeah. It's a noon. It's noon.
So he's forgiven for that one. Yeah, I think that's absolutely fine. Yeah, just thank you for joining me, mate. It's absolutely
Oh, thank you
just
for inviting me. I appreciate it.
yeah, good to put a face to put a sort of a face to the name sort of thing.
Yeah, appreciate it.
What are you working on at the moment then? Are you in the middle of a writing project, or are you sort of at the end of a writing project? What's your day looking
Yeah,
like?
well, I have three projects sort of going, and they're in different stages because when it goes off to the editor, I don't just twiddle my thumbs for a month or 2 months. I'll start
Yeah.
something else, and then so everything's kind of going through a stage. And so I've just finished the last book of the 2050 series, which is titled Collapse. And it has the cover's got the White House on fire. So that gives you some idea of what's going on there. So um, anyway, so yeah, that's pretty much finished. And that's taken up the last 2 years of my life, that series, which has been just massive. It's been incredibly complex, and trying to make all the pieces fit has been, I think I spent 2 months just on the plot outline, and the writing of it. The writing of the plot outline was over 100,000 words, just to give you an idea. And I think it was somewhere around 450 chapters, like throughout the whole series, or no, 540 something chapters. So it was about 100 some. The chapters are relatively short, but it's a lot to plan. And there's 4 points of view, so having the plot sort of wrap around each other and make sense and fit in with everybody's lives and have it actually be coherent was really challenging. It was rewarding but challenging. And so after I finished that, I wanted to do something not necessarily less challenging, but I wanted to kind of go back to more of the more of my thriller roots and some of the suspense, mystery, domestic thrillers that I was writing before. So I had an idea that was kicking around my head, which was basically it's told from 3 points of view, and instead of normally what I had been doing in the past, and I've done this throughout a lot of my books, is where I would do alternating points of view. So if I had 4 points of view, like in the 2050 series, character 1 would be chapter 1, chapter 5, chapter 9, and it would go in perfect order. So the reader would know exactly who was coming up next, and
Right.
and so what I decided to do for this one was something different, where I had 3 parts to the book. And the first part was one particular character, second part was another particular character, and the third part was another character. So, but you knew who all the characters were for the most part. So the first part was told from the wife's point of view. And so basically the wife finds out her husband is accused of a pretty awful crime, and ends up going to trial, and she basically has to make a choice between her husband or her family, because the family was involved in the crime. So she's having to choose between her natural born family versus her new family, and that's kind of the choice. And so the second part of it, not to give it away, but the second part is the husband in prison, who and him having to navigate prison, and you don't know whether he's guilty or not. But the second part is him having to navigate prison, and then the third part is their daughter trying to figure out whether or not he was guilty or not. And of course, I can't give away some of the twists, but
No,
but yeah, the daughter. There's questions about the daughter's paternity and whatnot. So
interesting. So what you've just described there, it interests me quite a lot, because you've sort of taken. It's quite common in a thriller, isn't it? And I do the same, is to have one chapter from one perspective, then the other, and you sort of knit them together throughout the story.
yeah,
And then at the end, they sort of tie up really tightly,
right.
and for some kind of climax. But you've sort of deconstructed that and done your own take on that. Was that purposeful? Did you think, right, I want to redesign this and do this in a different way? Or did that just occur to you as you were sort of planning the story?
I'm sure I've read a book like that before. I couldn't tell you the title, but I'm sure that is not. I'm sure I didn't come up with that idea.
No, I have seen it before, but it's not common, is it?
No.
Most books are.
No, when I think about point of view, I think about the story first,
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, well, what would be a cool point of view? Would it be better to tell this? And I tell almost everything in third point of view, third
Yeah.
person for the most part. I don't do any first person, but I'm not opposed to it. If I had a story, I'm like, you know what, this would be really cool to tell in first person. The thing I don't like about first person is I feel like people get way too into the weeds of thoughts, and it slows everything down, and it gets to be boring. And I just, I just didn't want. I'm not a big fan of it, but I'm not totally opposed to doing it. So when I have a story idea, it's like, okay, well, how would be the best way to tell this? And I was like, it would be really cool. Part 1, oh my God, my husband's been accused of a crime. Part 2, oh my God, I'm in prison. Part 3, what really happened? That's sort of the breakdown. And what's crazy is, so that one's off to my editor already. And then I started another one couple weeks ago, and I'm probably going to be done with this in a week and a half, but it's probably gonna be the shortest book I've ever written. I've never written a novella before. I think my shortest one was Stone Lake, which is about 67,000 words, which actually is more kind of romantic suspense. You could say literary fiction, but even contemporary romance. But anyway, but this book is a little different in that I've taken some things that have happened here. Recently I've sort of befriended this feral cat around here, and we get all sorts of animals on the property, but so this cat has kind of adopted us. And so I started thinking about like an idea, and my wife was like, "Oh, that's just a dumb idea." But
so you were like, definitely writing it now.
Yeah, exactly. So the idea is that okay, you have this guy that's living in the house, and I was like, okay, well, I'm just gonna use my house, and we're gonna live in this property. But my neighbors, instead of being the nice people that they are, they're gonna be a-holes, and they're all gonna be rich. And the idea is that they've got I'm surrounded by these McMansions, and they kind of want my land, and because they want to build on it, and I'm sort of this cranky old guy that's stuck on this property. And what you're not sure about in the beginning is why everybody hates him so much. So he has some interactions with the neighbors. Everybody kind of hates him. Nobody wants anything to do with him. He doesn't talk for like the first 6 or 7 chapters at all. And you eventually figured out that he had been accused of killing his wife, and he wasn't convicted, but there were a couple of hung juries, and so everybody sort of still thinks he's guilty, and they kind of want him out of the neighborhood. Property values and all not great, living next to the murderer. So he ends up befriending this cat on his land, and he seems crazy. I mean, he's suicidal. He seems insane. And I'm not going to say he's not, but he's been through a lot, and so he starts talking to this cat, and that's when he starts to talk. Is he starts to, and it's almost, for him, it's almost like therapy, because he has nobody to talk to. He calls his daughter every day, and she won't never pick up the phone, because she thinks he killed his mother, or her mother. So so he starts talking to this cat, and it starts to be it starts to take something that's dark and takes the edge off of the darkness, I think. And it makes it, some of it's really funny, I think, but and I think it does take the edge off. And I started reading it to my wife, and she's like, you know what? I thought that sounded really stupid when you said he's going to be talking to this cat, and if this and that. And she's like, but I can see it now, and and it's not totally unrealistic. I talked to the cat. In fact, it started raining here, and this is about 15 minutes before I started talking to you. I went out, just to grab a drink of water, and as I was going out, the feral cat that we take care of is sitting on my windowsill outside, like looking in. And I know it just started raining, so I know she wants to come in. So I went out and opened the door, and she comes in. But I talked to her. It's not, I'm not totally insane.
Cat, can you?
I'm not totally insane.
I'm always, hello, how are you? You do a voice, don't you? Hello.
Yeah.
It's always a bit more high pitched than usual.
So if I had nobody to talk to, I mean, who else would I talk to?
No, so. I'm with you there completely. I'm a big animal lover myself. Let's just pop over to the comments. We've got a couple of people saying hello to us. We've got Steve Moore in there. Who's popped
Oh,
in.
hey,
Says,
Stephen Moore.
All right, lads. Hello, Steve. How you doing? Alison says hello to us. Hi, Alison.
Hey,
and she's
Alison.
asked me to post a link to your book, so I'll post your website in there now in the comments. So Alison and anyone else who wants to can have a look at your website whilst
thank you, appreciate it.
we're going. So I had a look through your website before we were online here, and I've had a look down your books, and there does seem to be sort of like a theme that links them, and I'm not sure if the book that you've just mentioned would go in there, although I suppose with the whole crime, the whole element of justice with the person.
Right.
Did they get away with it? Did they not get away with it?
Right.
That sort of links with what I think your writing is about. What would you say that link is that sort of pulls all of your things together?
I think that's a good question. I mean, some of them I write in a lot of different genres, so you're going to see. I mean, now, if I had to pick one genre that, hey, this is the one I like the most, or this is the one I write in the most, is probably vigilante justice. That would be probably it. And I like underdogs. Like I don't like you know super soldiers or karate guys or people that are that are just these superhuman people. I like regular. Yeah. I don't even like writing cops, to be honest with you. I much prefer regular people. The guy I'm writing now was a truck driver. I like writing just regular blue collar jobs. I mean, I used to be a landscaper, so I kind of understand that world a little bit. And I think that, and I have this belief that everybody can be a hero regardless of their profession. And I think to me it's even more profound when it's a regular person, because they're not getting paid for it. Like they're not getting paid to go and catch the bad guy or do any of those things. I mean, they're just a regular person trying to live their life, is struggling just like the rest of us. And a lot of times, I heap a lot of struggle on that person typically. So not only do they have the struggle of whatever the story is, I make their life difficult in some way. They're poor, or they've had misfortunes, or family members have been murdered, or whatever. We like to heap on it and ultimately see what the protagonist is made of. But yeah, I love the underdogs, and I love writing the blue collar person that's just trying to make their way in the world and does the right thing.
Do you think that you're making a point with your writing, or are you going at it? Do you know what I mean? I'm not saying you're being preachy, because I read one of your books and it wasn't preachy at all. But I wonder whether there was an underlying sort of message or moral.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the book. So a lot of my political thrillers are very anti-government. I'll be straight out about that. I consider myself a voluntarist, which basically means that I believe all relationships that we have should be voluntary, meaning that, I came onto your podcast voluntarily. Like, you didn't have to put a gun to my head to do this. It was something I wanted to do. And, you wanted to have,
no, maybe you just...
Right. But, and for the most part, almost all of us are voluntarists in our regular lives. Almost all of us, that's how I didn't, club my wife over the head and pull her back to my cave to marry her. Right. I mean, hopefully I convinced her that it was a good idea. But the one relationship that is not voluntary for everybody is our relationship with the state, because we have regardless of where you're born on this planet, there's a state that, will come and take your money through taxation, will force you to abide by their rules. And, and some of the laws make sense and are in line with morality, but many of them are not. I mean, for example, drugs is one of my pet peeves. Now I'm not somebody who does drugs, but I feel like I think it's immoral to cage somebody and take away their freedom for hurting themselves. So if you want to do drugs and you're and a lot of times people that are drug addicts were abused as kids, which makes it even worse. So we take the most abused people in our society who become drug addicts, and then we lock them in cages. And in the United States, I don't think the UK is quite as bad with the prison industrial complex as the US. The US is just brutal. I don't know if you know this, but I and every other American have a 33% chance of being arrested in our lifetime. So think about that. 1 in 3 of us are going to be arrested at some point in our life. I mean, that's just staggering. So you're either telling me that a third of the American public is completely immoral, or our laws are ridiculously, a ridiculous burden on us. And here's another one: is there's a book called 3 Felonies a Day. I forget. It was written by civil liberties attorney Harvey Silverglate, and basically he figured out that the average American commits 3 felonies a day. And to be honest with you, I can think of many that I've committed, and I don't feel bad
Would
about them
that
at
just be
all.
like driving around when you go over the speed limit a little bit, or parking
Oh,
on the wrong line, or whatever it
well,
might be?
no,
You know,
not that wouldn't be a felony. Felony would
right?
be, there's of course there's drugs. There's a lot of felonies with drugs, but there's other stuff like, for example, if I shot my 22 on my land or something, that's a felony. If
Right,
I
and you
had,
wouldn't realize that it was you
well,
weren't supposed to do it.
I mean, there's felonies that you realize what they are, but you don't, but there's also felonies that you, I don't want to admit to crimes on the internet,
Of
but
course not. Of course not.
but I'm just saying that there are so many laws, and some of these felonies, if I committed them, I wouldn't feel bad about them. They're not, to me, that's not a question of morality. It's a question of the excessive laws that are put upon us. And
no, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely
so,
right.
and obviously there's the big ones are easy. We don't,
Don't
and that's
people,
we're not committing aggression against people. Don't hit people, don't hurt people, don't murder them, don't take their stuff. I mean, that covers the gamut. And I like when I look at morality, and it's something I wrote a book called The Propaganda Project, and I delve really heavy into philosophy and morality into that book. And it's a nonfiction book, but one of the things I really figured out for myself was that when I'm looking at a situation, for me personally, and then I use this type of morality similar for my protagonists and how they act and how they feel, is that I'm not a religious person, but I think the golden rule is a great place to start, where, I'm not going to do something to somebody else that I wouldn't want done to myself. And then the second piece of that, which makes things really complicated, is I believe that this is universal, meaning that if it's bad for me to hit you, then it's also bad for you to hit me. Or if it's bad for a group of people to steal my stuff, just as bad as it is for me to steal the stuff of my neighbor. So then you start looking at like, okay, well, if it's bad for a gang of people to come over to my house and steal my stuff without my, to come here and take my stuff, is it then bad for a group called the U.S. government to come and steal my stuff?
Yeah.
So you start making these, it gets very complicated. And the problem, of course, people run into is the propaganda that we've all been subjected to since birth. And that's really tough. All the patriotism, all the, we need this and we need that. And without government, we would, all of a sudden people start making excuses for why the theft and murder is okay. Because when you boil it down to it, the U.S. government and every government on this planet would not have a single thing without stealing. That's how they're all structured. It's impossible for them to do anything without taxation, without stealing people's stuff. So, you could say, well, we voted for it. Okay. Well, let's say I came to your house and said, hey, Luke, I've got a Coke and a Pepsi. Vote. Can you, they're each $1. You get to vote for which one you want, and then you'll give me $1. And you're like, Phil, but I'm good. I don't really drink that stuff. It's bad for my teeth. And I'm like, well, if you don't vote, I'm going to give you one of these that everybody else wanted, and then I'm going to take your $1. So anyway,
there's no way to win with that, really.
There's no way to win with that. So I mean, taxation in of itself is, and then of course people they talk about the social contract, and I don't know, I've never seen any contract. The U.S. government's never asked my permission for anything. So anyway, so that's
interesting.
Yeah. That my attitude and my politics tends to, it's very rare that I meet someone that doesn't think that I'm, out there or and it doesn't bother me. It doesn't hurt my feelings when people say that's crazy. And I know I've been down all the rabbit holes, and I've tried to prove that this stuff is crazy, and we need the government, and from all my research and everything I've looked at, I can't in good conscience support any state, any compulsive state.
What you're talking about essentially is social conditioning, isn't it? You're conditioned into such a position that you think that is that. This is far off the topic that we would normally go into in this discussion, but it's interesting.
Well, the propaganda is so important, and I see that a lot now, and it's really sad to see, because it's gotten really bad here in the U.S. with the divisive politics, where you have, I would say 99%, maybe 95% of people either fall on the right or the left. They either identify as a Republican or they identify as a Democrat
the entire time, forever. Switching from one to the other.
Yeah, you have a few people that switch, but for the most part, they're stuck in these in this right left paradigm, and they literally hate each other. And I often wonder if the people at the top aren't twiddling their thumb, or aren't like sitting there enjoying this as we fight each other, and they continue to inflate our currency, steal our money, commit wars all over the globe, and do basically wreak havoc on the planet while we fight with each other as if we're the enemy. And really, we need to be looking at the people above us, specifically.
I've had similar thoughts myself. Do you think then your books often follow the idea of like an epiphany or an enlightenment, where your character suddenly sees those bars that they haven't seen for the whole of their life? Those bars suddenly become visible, or perhaps the bars are removed and they realize the world is a different way than so there's like a paradigm shift in the character's consciousness.
Yeah, it's really interesting that sometimes I have a character like there's a book I wrote, it's called Sedition, and in Sedition they're it's more of a, it's kind of like the 2050 series, except it's modern day and it's a standalone. And it's of course I've wrote the main, one of the main characters delivers motorcycles. I don't know, I like truck drivers for some reason. So he delivers motorcycles for a living, but he listens to podcasts all day, and he has this crazy memory. He can recall everything. And but he's just kind of a regular guy, and he's sort of figured out a lot of these things. So from his perspective, in that particular book, he already knew a lot of these things, and he was thrown into. He ends in the very beginning. He saves this congressman's life, not by accident, but he sort of lucks into it, however you want to look at it, and then it sort of thrusts him onto the national stage. And then, of course, he has all these crazy viewpoints. And then that, of course, starts to sway people. He starts to sway people, not intentionally, and he becomes this lightning bolt for all this stuff, all this conflict. And there's a conflict between the statists, the actual government, and then people who are against the state. But in other books, I like the idea of in the 2050 series, for example, I have got one of my favorite characters is Derek, who's a farmer, kind of like me. I identify with him, but he's not a political person. He's just a regular guy. And his girlfriend ends up getting murdered. And by a diplomat, by this Chinese diplomat who's sort of protected by the government, by the U.S. government. And so he ends up taking out his revenge, and he ends up getting sent to it. And in the series in 2050, basically they test when you're arrested for a crime, they test you, and they have these tests to find out if you're a sociopath or a psychopath. And if you test positive, they ship you off to this island in the Caribbean, depending on where you are, or an island in the South Pacific if you're on the West Coast. And they just basically leave these people to their own devices. And the island's been wrecked by hurricanes, so there's essentially nothing there. It's very tribal, and so he finds himself. That's kind of the crux of the story. He and another character end up finding themselves on this island. The other character ends up doing something against the government, so that's how she ends up getting shipped off. And so the government uses this not only to get rid of the bad people, but also to get rid of anybody who is a dissenter. And so they essentially squash all dissent by shipping people away.
By faking the test result, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. So that's sort of the crux. Yeah. So those characters didn't really know everything, but they sort of found out the hard way that, oh my God, this is not good. This is not. I'm living the nightmare.
I really like. I mean, I would say dystopian, but I suppose you might argue with that, because you're saying that this is sort of a present day dystopia, really, rather than a futuristic one. Well, in 2050, obviously, it was future, but Sedition is present day. But I think in a lot of ways we're living through a present day dystopia for sure. If you read Philip K. Dick or George Orwell, some of these dystopian writers from the 50s, around that era. This is it. Do you know what I mean? This is it.
Right. Well, I don't know if you read Alas Babylon. That was about the nuclear. That's pretty interesting. It's one of the first kind of post-apocalyptic books. A really good book. I actually read it in high school, but.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Let's have a quick look at some of these comments. I'm really enjoying this.
Okay, great.
I will go up from the bottom. Fiona says, hello. Hi, Fiona. Great
to see you. Hi, Fiona.
No worries about being late. John says he's just on a cheeky New England IPA. Oh, I haven't shown you mine, John. I'm on a Tribute Pale Ale,
nice.
Which is a which is a beer from Cornwall, I think. Are you a beer drinker, Phil, in the evenings?
No, I prefer liquor.
Mhm.
Moscow Mule. That's the drink I like.
What's in a Moscow Mule?
It's like ginger beer and lime and vodka. I mean, some people
Nice.
use what's a substitute? I think some people substitute not bourbon. No, I think they substitute bourbon. And I've had it that way. And I didn't like it. Much prefer the
Oh,
vodka.
like
I
it,
guess, which makes
like it.
sense if it's called a Moscow Mule, right?
Yeah, yeah, I suppose so.
And you're supposed to serve it in a copper cup, which we have copper cups here, and I guess it keeps it really
Nice.
cold. So
Yeah.
you feel cool drinking it too. So
I love it. I love it. Andrew says, "Hi guys, just signed up for Phil's newsletter. And Luke, I found you on Chirp and got my hands on your audiobook of Kathmandu.
oh, that's great.
Thank you, Andrew. I hope you enjoy that. It's my
That's great.
first
Thank you.
effort of narrating it as well." Alison says, "I always say hello and ask my next door's cat if he's okay. I'm sure he'll answer one day."
He might. He might.
It would surprise you if he did. And then he'll stand up and walk away on his hind legs.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's funny because they actually have a lot of ways of communicating. This is something I've learned obviously through experience. So I've translated that to the book. Blinking at you is a sign that they like you, or they they can wink, or you get the yawning and they tilting their ears when they're confused about something, and it's just a lot of different ways that they can communicate. And it's also how the character, he's of course personifying the cat because he doesn't have anybody to talk to. So
it must be an interesting way. We'll talk back about that in a minute. I just want to. Darren's put this comment on, and I think this is an interesting topic. He says, "Phil, I can see you've used quite a lot of book trailers. Have you found them useful to sort of getting people involved in your books?
Absolutely not.
Enjoy them?" No,
absolutely not. Yeah, no, I haven't really. I made the book trailers thinking that, hey, maybe it'll sell a few more books, but I don't think that it's moved the needle at all. But if I certainly wouldn't pay someone to do it for sure.
Yeah, yeah. But because I noticed one of yours, I've only watched one, and it was like a quite simple sort of animation with a couple of characters and speech bubbles and stuff. Do you make them yourself on a sort of
the cartoons? No, I actually had the cartoons done
right.
for me. I had a cartoonist from, where was he from? He's from somewhere in Eastern Europe. Great guy. I can't remember what country he's. Oh no, if not from Eastern Europe, he's from Poland. So Polish guy, great guy. He did a fantastic job. And actually, I wrote and produced a longer, I think it was like 10-minute video called the Bakery. And I just love that video. I mean, it didn't really do much to sell my book, but I love the story in it, because basically it was sort of a fictional story that was inside the Propaganda Project, which is the nonfiction book I wrote. And basically it was a story that I wrote about what it would be like if a guy ran his bakery like the government. And so it's absolutely hilarious. So basically, he's like, so in the beginning, he's this guy, works super hard, and he's like, I got to make all these different breads. I get up really early. I'm really nice to my customers, even though I hate them, all that stuff. And but this is capitalism, right? I've got to produce a good product and make sure that people come and buy it. And so then he's like, you know what, forget this. And I'm tired of this. He's like, I'm going to sleep in. I'm just going to make one type of bread. I'll let it sit around. It'll be stale. I don't care. I'll just start making people. If they don't come and buy it, I'll just start making them. So making them buy my bread. So I guess he works out at a karate dojo. So he hired some of his buddies, and they would go, and then they started intimidating the customers, saying, you better come over and buy your monthly bread allotment, or otherwise we're going to, give you a knuckle sandwich, that type of thing. And so of course he finds that it's expensive to hire these thugs basically to make people come in and buy his bread. So he's like, okay, well, and so then he ends up having to borrow from the bank, and starts propagandizing people with the bread education, the bread schools, and it's basically a whole parody on what the government's like
an Animal Farm,
yeah, absolutely, absolutely, in that same vein. Very funny, definitely worth a look. It's only like 10 minutes long, but it was very expensive to produce, and it turned out great, but it hadn't moved the needle for me at all.
Just as a fun project to do. I quite enjoy doing that. There's a couple of things I'd like to do with my books that, little side stories, little off stories that would only be a few thousand words, but and you wouldn't sell, but you'd give them to people, and give
Right.
the people that have read it already, and things like that. They're fun to produce, aren't they? And I think they're
Yeah,
appreciated
it
by
was
people who like the books.
it was great fun. I'd like to have my thousands of dollars back, but
Yeah.
but no, he was worth it. The cartoonist, he did a fantastic job. You know,
Mm.
it's my own it's my own inadequacies as a marketer that didn't get it where it needed to go.
A question for you. Interestingly, so we've talked about your books having this sort of deeper meaning, following your ideas about anti-establishment and those sorts of things. But I read, or rather listened to, your Predator Hunter book, and whilst it did clearly have this point, this anti-establishment point that you're talking about, it was also a great story. It was gripping, emotive, all of the things that you want in a great sort of thriller.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
No, you're welcome. Credit where it's due. Do you how do you strike that balance? And is it a balance you have to work to strike, or do you know what I mean? Do you think, that's too much of the conspiracy stuff? Let's make it a bit more plotty and a bit more emotive, or put in a romance angle or something like this.
Right.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I have a list of ideas, so I keep a big long list of ideas, and when it's like, okay, it's time to figure out what I want to, like when I'm done with the project, I'm like, okay, I need to figure out what's next. I'll go down the list, and whatever I feel really passionate about, I'll write. And the fact that, I'm an indie publisher like you, there's nobody telling me, well, you can't say that, or you shouldn't write that. And maybe it's good and maybe it's bad, I don't know, but there's not a lot of censorship on my part. If I think that, if I want to write about, some, like, for example, when a lot of times I'll put real, what people would call conspiracy theories into certain books, and they'll be real. And I'll do my research on it. And if I think it's, I could be wrong, but most of the time these conspiracy theories, if I'm not totally making something up, but if I'm using something from the past, for example, one really good example is in 2050, they tried to shut down the Federal Reserve. Like, they tried to revoke the charter, and there was a bunch of congressmen that were on board with this idea. And of course, they started dropping like flies and getting assassinated. And in the book, they talk about how this has actually happened in the past. So there were, now whether or not it was the Federal Reserve or not, it's tough to say, but there was a string of powerful politicians throughout history that have been not disappeared, but murdered. There was and they were all anti-banking, essentially. And here's a really creepy example. I forget the two senators' names, but they died in plane crashes. I forget the guy's name. I think I feel like Tower was in the last name or in the middle name or something. But anyways, these two guys that died in separate plane crashes 2 days apart, or 1 day apart. So and they were both against this banking, against the banking establishment. Another good example is Andrew Jackson, who they tried to kill. And he would be dead if it wasn't for the assassin who had had his gun misfire. Or maybe, I don't remember if he had two. I think he had one, and his gun misfired. So that's the only reason why he survived. And what's really interesting about that is the National Geographic tested that very gun, recently. You can find the article somewhere, and they figured out some ridiculous amount of, like, they got it to work fine, and they figured it was like 1 in 100,000 that would happen, or 1 in 50,000. I think the guy actually had two guns, and both of them misfired. I think is the way the story went. And I think the chances of that happening were some astronomical amount. I don't remember the exact numbers, but they figured it all out, which I thought was really cool. So, but anyway, so I do try to take some of these things that are true and sort of, just drop the seeds, and people can do with it what they want. If they think it's not true, then that's fine. But it might make somebody look into it for themselves. And that's really what I want, is for people to think for themselves. I don't want people to necessarily believe everything I say. I want them to say, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I should look that up for myself. That would be a better way of handling it. But
in fact, then you must, as a writer, you really were born in the right time, weren't you? Because if you were born, 50 years ago, your books would be buried in some dusty basement, with no one reading them,
Or I'd have to write in serious allegories. Like, I wouldn't be able to say certain things. You'd have to, and I think that's what George Orwell was doing. And yeah. So yeah, it is great to have the indie stuff and be able to just put out. I do worry, because there's been a lot of censorship recently, that's gotten really bad. Even Amazon has sort of participated in some of this. And I worry that, what's to stop someone. And I think the reason I haven't run into any problems is I'm essentially a nobody. So, I mean, nobody's, it's not like I'm famous. If I was famous, I think there would be the risk that Amazon would be taking some of these books down. And that's always a concern, is that, you put all this work into something and you want to put these ideas out. And then, we have such a censorship culture now where, for example, people are getting censored on YouTube for just even suggesting that the election was rigged in 2020. So even the idea that, hey, that's a concern or something like that, that can get your stuff banned. Now, I'm no expert in the election. I didn't look into it. I certainly wasn't backing one or the other, but there were certainly some things that gave me pause. One of the biggest things that I saw, and this has nothing to do with conspiracy, this was just how the votes went. And there was, for example, usually what happens is when you have a presidential race, the president gets roughly the same votes. Like if you're the Democratic nominee for president, you usually get roughly the same votes as the senatorial candidate and the congressman candidate for the Democratic Party on the same ticket. So, for example, let's say Trump got 500,000 votes in say Minnesota, and then the Republican congressman would probably get roughly 500,000 votes.
Yes.
Et cetera, right? Which makes sense, and that's proved out over elections year over year. They tend to see that. I mean, it's not perfect, but it usually comes pretty close. But in 2020, in the swing states, Biden got this enormous amount more votes than the other Democrats on the ticket. And it's like, okay, well, it could be nothing. It could very well be nothing. But to me, I look at that and say, okay, well, that's fishy. That's fishy. And as far as I know, I didn't see anybody address that to the point that satisfied me. And knowing what I know about how crooked everybody is.
And that's
What's
the
that?
impetus. That's the impetus of a great story idea, isn't it? It starts with something like that, in my mind, certainly.
Sure.
It starts with this little fact that is true, like this little
something confusing
or something confusing, and then you just turn up the heat, don't you? You turn it up to 5 or up to 10, and you just watch it go and see what could possibly happen.
Absolutely.
That's sort of what makes great stories. Would you ever write something historical? Because there must be some great conspiracy theories like that.
There's lots of good historical stuff. I've never gotten into this historical stuff just because the amount of research is daunting to me.
Yeah.
And now, if I lived in the time, now I'm 45, so if I can write something in the 80s, that's okay. I lived that time, but I think to write in the 50s or something like that would be harder for me. It's certainly not in my wheelhouse. And I try to make these stories as something that is interesting to me and something that I already know a lot about. So I'm not spending forever on research, because I do a lot of research, and I try to limit that. Otherwise, it's going to take me a whole year to write a book, and it's hard to get any traction if you're doing that. But
how long does it take you from sort of first when you've got the idea to finished book?
It really depends. The nonfiction takes me a little longer. The 2050 series took me a little longer. The books were a little long and the research was heavy. But a typical thriller, like I can usually write 3 a year. So it's about 4 months.
That's good,
So the one I'm writing now, the shorter one, I mean, that's going to be done. That's going to be more like a 2-month project, but, which is great. It's almost like a palate cleanser. So, and it's been fun, it's been one of those fun projects. So.
And you plan these out, you mentioned earlier, you plan these out before you start, or you have like...
I definitely plot everything before. I write pretty detailed plot outlines, but I'm also open to change. So if I'm writing something and something comes up and I say, okay, well, I got to change my entire plot outline, I do that. It happens all the time. It's like, okay, well, this would be way better if this happened. And sometimes you just learn it from discovery writing. It's like, okay, I thought it would go this way, but this would be way better. And okay, that means now I got to go back to the plot outline and rewrite it where it needs to be rewritten to make it all fit back together. And I always make sure to do that. So if I come to a fork in the road and I'm like, you know what, I think it would have gone way better if I would have done this. And, and then that's perfectly fine to do that. For example, today I was actually writing, or no, it was yesterday. I was writing the book about the guy and the cat, and he's become sort of this revenge. He started to take some revenge against his neighbors, which is good fun, by the way. It's good fun to, commit vandalism on the page. But he makes this slurry of, cat feces and whatnot. And this guy's like crazy about his Porsche GT3. It's a, $170,000 vehicle. He dumps it in the plenum, the front, like the air intake right by the windshield. Where you breathe in through the heating and AC. And so as I was writing this, I was like, because he snuck into the garage as the wife was leaving. And I was like, wouldn't this be funny if as he's doing this, the garage door opens and the wife comes back. And of course the cat's with him. So the cat leaves, and this is the really funny part, is the cat leaves little paw prints on the car, which is even greater because it's perfectly immaculate. And the cat's like walking on the car, and so the wife comes back and he hides like kind of in the junk of the garage, but the cat's just sort of hanging out, and she sees the cat. She's like, "Oh, what are you doing here?" And she's like, "Oh, aren't you cute and sweet?" And blah blah blah. And then she of course sees she smells it, and then of course she sees and prior to that he had carved a sort of like a stick figure picture of a cat, and it said something like "nice ride," and he signed it "Baby Kitty," and with this knife in the front hood, and anyway, so he's in the back behind these boxes, and he's getting dust, and he accidentally sneezes, and she of course freaks out and runs back into her vehicle and backs the car out of the garage, skims the side of it, scratches it up, and of course she's gone. But I thought, I was like, that's way funnier than having them just sort of get out. And yeah. So, but that wasn't in the plot outline, all of it, So that was just sort of as you're writing, I'm like, oh, wouldn't that be better? But
I do that quite often. You've just got to go with it, haven't you? When you're sitting
there
with
absolutely.
those characters doing that thing, and something happens, and you can just go on.
Yeah, and it's almost like they're acting for themselves sometimes, which is cool. It's like, well, I don't really like what you've got on that plot outline. This would be way better.
Yeah. Who's in charge?
Don't tell me what to do.
Yeah. Let's have a quick look at the comments and see who's in. John says he likes the sound of your books, Phil.
Oh, thanks, John. Appreciate it.
We've got Stephen Taylor has joined us. Hi, Steve, another author.
Hey, Stephen.
Guys. Alison says she's drinking watermelon juice. Interesting.
She is addicted though, so it's appropriate.
Yeah, there we go. And John says this is the tribute. The St Austell Brewery is one of his favourites. Try Proper Job.
Nice.
Yes, I know Proper Job as well. That's a nice beer. See, beer in England, Phil, is. Have you been to England? Have you been?
Never.
This side of the pond. Well, we have our beer warm and flat.
Really?
It's not fizzy like a lot of your American lagers.
Interesting.
So. Although there's some great American lagers too, so I can't argue against that. So you said before we were on the call that you were also quite a horticulturalist, involved in the garden and sort of that sort of physical side of things. Does that offer a nice contrast to the sort of writing work? Because I can imagine you're there doing something very physical with your hands,
right.
You're coming up with the great ideas whilst you're doing that.
Yeah, it's I actually I don't really get a lot of ideas. Usually I get new ideas when I'm sitting down for bed or getting into bed and about to go to sleep. And a lot of times I'll read a little bit before I go to sleep. And sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and I have to keep a pad next to my dresser. And last night I scribbled, what did I scribble last night? Something about the smell of cat feces, something like that. Because I remembered from that scene that I'd written that I didn't include how horrible it smelled. And then I also wrote another quote about another note to myself. It's like, I have to make him hold his urine for a long time because he needs a lot of urine for that to work. And so I wrote myself that note at like 3:00 in the morning. So a lot of times I'll get these weird ideas in the middle of the night and I just scribble them down. But out in the garden, it's nice because it takes me from, the desk job to being outside doing something physical, which I think is good for my health. None of us are getting any younger, and and also connecting with nature. There are things. There are certain microbes in the soil that help our moods. They help with like serotonin production. There's all sorts of things that I used to struggle with depression, and when I started gardening, it really helped. Like, I don't deal with it near as much as I used to. I occasionally would run through bouts here and there, but that's one thing that's really helped me to be much more even, and is being able to be out in nature. And and 2 days a week, basically I spend the entire day out on our homestead here, where I'm out, working on the land and whatnot, right. Whether it's, picking produce or planting or pruning, whatever needs to be done, taking care of the animals, all that stuff.
So do you work sort of a 5-day week writing and publishing and doing this sort of business, and then that's your weekend? You do it in that sort of traditional way?
Yeah. So actually, believe it or not, I go Monday, Wednesday are outside days. Although today it didn't end up working out because of the rain. But so it's somewhat. So usually what happens is Monday, Wednesday are outside days. Tuesday, Thursday, Friday are writing days. Sunday's another writing day, and then Saturday is just straight marketing. I found that by batching everything, doing just one thing all day is way more efficient, because I was starting and stopping projects, and I found myself trying to do everything in the same day and getting nothing done. Because it takes me, I think when I sit down to write in the morning on a writing day, I'll sit there for half an hour sometimes and just stare at the screen. I'm like, I don't know how I want to begin this, and I'm not sure. And then, and then finally, once I start getting going, then things start to move a lot quicker.
It's all consuming as well, isn't it? You sit down to write at 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. or whatever, and you look up and it's 4. The day is just, it's just
absolutely. Absolutely. And the great thing about it is, I as much as I love working outside, I enjoy the writing days the most of all my days. Marketing would probably be the least, although I don't hate marketing, but the writing days I enjoy the most. It's like, okay, it's a writing day today. I can see what's going to happen next in this story or that story. Although one thing I do hate is I hate proofing audiobooks. Like, once you get down to the nitty gritty of the editing and proofing, I find that very tedious, but I know it has to be done. But those are the days that I hate the most, I think.
Your audiobook, by the way, is brilliant, because it's like multiple narrators, isn't it?
Yeah.
I really got into it. There's a female one, and then I think she does about 2 or 3 characters, the female narrator, doesn't she? And the male one does 2 or 3 characters as well.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So it's Tristan and Grace. It's Grace Wright Productions, and they do a fantastic job. They've done all my books. When I first started with audio, as a listener, I don't like it when men are playing women and doing the voices. It just takes me out of the story. And no offense to the narrators that do that or the books that do that. I mean, it's fine. I prefer, not that I don't listen to those books, but I prefer it when you have a female narrator that does all the female voices and a male narrator that does all the male voices. And and the female or male can do the kids, depending on how you want to do that. But usually it ends up, to me, I think you get that back and forth where it seems like it's 2 people that are not the same person talking to each other, because they're not. And there's that element of realism. I actually really, Sarah Grace Wright, who's the female narrator, I just think she's fantastic. And Tristan's great too. But they're both very, very talented. And one of the things I knew right up front is there's just no way I could do what they do. Like, I'm amazed that you're able to narrate your book. I know if I tried to do it, it would be brutal. In fact, I know it would be brutal, because I did it on my podcast once, and I told my listeners, this is going to be brutal. So, and I did it with my wife. So we had two people, and I was not good.
I bet it was great fun though. I bet you enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun. It was just a little section of the book for people, but yeah, I have all the respect in the world for the narrators, and worth every penny to pay the extra to have male and female, I think.
It was a great listen. I definitely recommend it to those listening. If you're an audiobook listener, look on that on Audible or on. Is it just on Audible, or do you go on the other stores as well?
No, it's all on Audible. I think with Audible they also put it on like
Oh,
like no,
iTunes, is it?
like yeah, I think they do put it on iTunes and everything because they distribute to the other stores. I think what ends up happening is I just get less commission on the other stores is all that happens,
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
fine,
No,
whatever.
I
I'm
really
happy if
enjoyed it.
anybody buys anything.
That's it. Always the way. Let's have a
Yeah.
quick look at the comments whilst we're
Okay.
here. So RH Braun has jumped in. That's great. Good to see Phil. He's your
Oh, hey,
proofer.
it's Ray. Hey, Ray, how you doing?
One of your proofreaders. Brilliant. He's become a bit of a regular. It's always lovely to see him.
Yeah, Ray's proofed quite a few of my books.
He's got a good eye. He's picked out some things in mine as well. And you know when a book's been out for about 2 years and it's been through so many lines of editing and read by so many people. A big respect for people that can still find a couple of little things
I
that
know.
aren't quite right in there.
I'm always disturbed by what my beta readers find, and Ray's a really good one. Ray's done a great job for me, and you know I'm always disturbed by what everybody finds. I'm like, you know what? Had I just put this out, ooh,
I know,
you know,
I know.
and I that's after me going to a professional proofreader, editor, me being through it a few times, and they always find at least 10 different things.
And
that
once
need
they
to be
point it
fixed.
out to you, it's kind of clear as day, isn't it? Once
Yeah,
they
it
point
becomes
out
very
to you,
clear.
You know, but before that, you
Yeah.
just can't figure it out.
Yeah.
Steve says gardening and forest bathing are two of my favorite things. I'm proud
Nice.
of my Mexican haven. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, he can grow all the tropical stuff. We can't really
Yeah.
grow here. I'm in northern climates, so we miss out on all the tropical stuff. Of course, everybody who lives in the tropics wants to grow apples and everything else that we can grow here. But
That's it. Anja says hello.
hi, Anja.
Alan Williams, no relation to yours, because he's a friend of mine from
We don't all.
Nottingham.
Hey,
Says,
Alan.
we don't all like our beer warm and flat. He's a cider drinker, though. You could make some cider, though, couldn't you, Phil?
Yeah, I like cider. I'm a cider
orchards.
drinker too. With apples, we get some good cider around here. Warm cider is great in the winter.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it must be good just to eat an amount of stuff that eat things that you've grown yourself. That must be a real fortifying.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we just cooked the last of our crookneck squash from last year, last week. So
Nice.
that's how long, you know, so that stuff went ripe last September. And, you know, I stocked my root cellar filled with squash and potatoes and onions. And so we just finished the last of the squash, as, you know, now we're starting to get new things coming up. You know, in fact, we actually eat a lot of wild food. So a lot of our salads are wild stuff. So chickweed is what's one thing that's coming up a lot now, which, you know, we supplement a lot of our salads with that. In fact, a lot of times we'll eat just chickweed with the salad. It's pretty mild and as far as a lettuce substitute goes. But there's so much.
Go off walking into the fields or the
yeah. A lot of times in my garden, I let that stuff grow. So I know all the stuff that around here, at least I know the stuff that's edible. And so the edible stuff, instead of, you know, if I see it in the garden, instead of wasting my time trying to weed it, I just let it grow and know that I'm going to eat that at some point. So, so that's I love learning about wild foods and figuring out which stuff you can eat and which stuff you can't, and, you know, incorporating that into your diet. It's healthier than the store-bought stuff.
Well, that's it. All the what is it? All the pesticides and
those
sorts of things.
Yeah, there's all that too.
And all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Totally agree with you. Anya's told me off for saying her name wrong. It's Anya. Sorry, Anya. I'm probably going to forget that, remember that now, and then say it wrong again next week. I had this when I was a teacher. Like, you know, you have someone with a name that's not pronounced as you'd expect. They'd point it out to me when I read the register, and then by the next lesson, I'd completely forgotten. I knew the name, but just not quite how to say it right.
Yeah, I'm terrible with names.
Sorry, Anya, I've got it now. Let's have a look. So Steve says, spending silent time alone in the forest. The Japanese call it forest bathing. Amazing for my anxiety issues.
Nice.
I think there's
a darker side of that, by the way, Steve. So we don't have to go into that, of the Japanese going into the forest and offing themselves. Isn't that right? Like that? Yeah, that's a thing in Japan. I don't know. You have to look that up, but I know that's like suicide's big in Japan. And I don't know if it comes from like the heavy amount of pressure they put on themselves, all the work pressure and everything. But it's a big thing in Japan.
I have heard that.
And there's a lot of books that have come out from Japanese authors that are surrounding the suicide and whatnot. It's big into the culture. But
do you think? I mean, have you seen with your books, based on the sort of subjects that they cover, have you noticed particular news events that have led to more people being interested in your books? You know, with ones that you've written that might have an election in them, or that might have a you know, some sort of corruption in them, or a particular murder case, or something that has happened that has led, you know.
Yeah, I haven't really noticed that, but I have had people come back to me. For example, I just had a promotion going with Sedition, which I wrote in 2016. Um, and they came back to me and said, "How did you know the government was just going to give away stimulus money to everybody?" And it's like, well, I didn't know, but I kind of figured that would come eventually because they're trying to force inflation and buy votes and all that other stuff. And essentially they're stealing $10 from us and giving us back one. And we're supposed to say thank you.
Yeah, so thanks
But anyway, but yeah, so I had an email from a reader that was like, "How'd you know that was going to happen?" And then another reader was like, "How'd you know that they're going to rig the election?" Because there was election rigging in Sedition, but again, we can't talk about that either.
But it's interesting to think that you know, that these things that I suppose you've just suggested that they might. I mean, there could have been anything else that you suggested.
Yeah, it's just in the story. It's just in the story. Some of the stuff is just like, well, that could happen. That's plausible, and that would be interesting for the plot, and that would go. So it made sense. For example, in Sedition, the main character, the guy, he sort of runs for president as a not serious. Like, he's doing it to bring awareness to the evils of the state. And if he wins, he's not going to take the job. That's the idea. He wants to just bring awareness. And of course he goes into this big debate. It's like one of the biggest debates, and it's against the Republican and the Democrat. And he finds out, and he has this terrible fear of public speaking, which makes it even worse. And he's been practicing. At first, he was literally puking in the trash can, you know, as he's trying to practice and stuff. And he finally sort of got over some of his fears. But he finds out before the debate that his opponents already know all the questions, and he has no clue. Right? He doesn't know what he's walking into. And then he walks out on the debate podium, and he sees his father sitting in the front row, and he has this tumultuous relationship with his father or his mother. I can't remember. It was his father. It was his father, and he has this tumultuous relationship with his father who was abusive, and they have no relationship, and he just sort of shows up right there to sort of put him off his game, so to say. Yeah. So you get a sense of how badly they want to skew things one way or the other, and he eventually pulls it out, and then of course it turns out that, well, we won't go into all that, but
don't give the story away.
But
I want to read this.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, no, it sounds interesting.
But there's a lot of election rigging going on in the book, though.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Phil, it's been absolutely fantastic to speak to you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. I appreciate you having me on. That was great.
Yeah, if you stick around, we'll have a quick conversation afterwards.
Okay.
Everyone else, thank you for joining us. It's been amazing to talk to you and to see you again. I will be back next week. I will let you know in my email if there'll be anyone joining me, or if I will be on my own, or you can check my Facebook group for that. Thanks so much. If you've only just tuned in at the end, remember, as soon as this is finished, you can go back to the start and watch the rest of it should you want to. Thanks so much. See you next time.